I feel like I can't keep going, and yet I have no idea who will take care of my child if I'm not here. This is the most painful comment and message that I get consistently. The complete conundrum of feeling like you can't move on with your child because you feel like you're not doing a good job. You feel like you're tired of every meltdown, of the PTSD, of the trauma. And yet you love your child so much and you have no idea that, and you know that no one can care for them as well as you can. And I want to dive deeper into this. What if I told you that there was a way that you could feel better and feel like you could keep going while not having to worry about outliving your child, um, because they'll be able to care for themselves. So most parents focus on therapy for their child, which simply uses a system of repetition. And this is actually great. One of the reasons they use this system is that it involves a completely different part of the brain. I don't know if you ever heard this, but in The Power of Habits, there was a very good excerpt that talked about how repetition and memory are two different areas of the brain, and that people who have had short-term memory loss or long-term memory loss, or usually short-term memory loss due to an accident, could still, in many cases, live independently. Why is that? If they can't remember anything from 5 minutes ago? And how could they find their ways around homes and bathrooms and find their ways around the block? And it was because repetition actually accesses a different part of the brain, which is why our children in ABA and in many and speech, much of what they are taught is through repetitive fashion. I can tell you one thing though, if you make it fun, children will learn these things 400 times faster than in repetition. But now saying that, let us dive back into what I was talking about before. So focusing on clearing up the pathways to memory and behavior areas of the brain, the amygdala, are going to actually help your child gain independence, communication, and have a completely different outcome in the future. What if there is an actual missing link? What if there is a way, as people describe it to me, to unlock the door or the prison that their child is in within their brains? There is. So what happens when we ignore inflammation that's caused by our daily exposures to toxicity, heavy metals, chemicals that are now up to 80,000 more of them? Well, I shouldn't say 80,000 more heavy metals. Those are heavy metals in standard, but we've created 80,000 chemicals in the last 100 years, even more so now. What happens if we choose to ignore this and continue on the path of focusing on just therapy, of choosing what I like to call the chauffeur lifestyle rather than the cooking lifestyle? There is a difference, and I'm going to share them now. So when we neglect health and allow toxins, particularly heavy metals and chemicals, to affect the brain, several significant, negative impacts can happen. I'm going to go through them with you. So neurodegeneration, yes, heavy metals, and they each have their own versions of this. I'm going to tell you a little bit of where you can find them and a little bit why they impact the brain. So exposures to heavy metals like lead and mercury, which seem like it would be hard to get exposed to these in the world today, and cadmium, which if you follow me on Instagram, which I highly recommend you do, my handle is @RebelSpectrum, you will have seen a story that just went by on cadmium, especially being literally found in every French fry and burger place in the United States. It has absolutely no biological value, and it can lead to the degeneration of neurons. These metals can disrupt cellular processes. They induce oxidative stress and cause free radicals, which are damaged cells, and they trigger apoptosis and programmed cell death earlier, leading to conditions such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, and other form of brain issues or brain pathologies, I'll say. And so what do chemicals do? So this is just in the realm of heavy metals. And I just talked about In-N-Out Burger having, not just In-N-Out Burger, I'm not going to call them out, but like literally the top 20 burger places were tested, and all of their food, 100% of their test results came back with cadmium in it. Putting that into perspective. We have mercury found in the mercury solution in high fructose corn syrup, which is in pop, which is in sweets, which is in candy. So these are just some of the areas that our children on the spectrum seem to be highly addicted to and have higher levels of. We know that studies show that our kids on the spectrum have higher levels of mercury than most places. Some breads even have higher levels of high fructose corn syrup, which can, again, accumulate. Why is this scary? And I think that it's important to note that certain chemicals or heavy metals and chemicals have a longer duration in the body than others. For example, for mercury, you can't just detox mercury quickly. It has a half-life of 30 years generally if you're actively trying to remove it. And although it is possible, it isn't going to happen overnight, even with chelation. Chemicals. So chemicals are persistent. So what are the negative effects of chemicals? They're persistent exposures to certain chemicals, especially things like food dyes. We know that these are not safe for consumption. I know that there's this thought pattern around why would our governments allow for these things to be in our food? But the truth is that nobody can monitor 80,000 chemicals as and evidence just continuously is emerging on many of the chemicals we once thought were safe. It's that things are becoming more researched, not that necessarily everybody knows about it. So what are some of the areas that we see these chemicals? Pesticides, insecticides, industrial solvents. They can also contribute to neurodegenerative diseases by damaging neurons and the brain's overall structure. This is some pretty big stuff. What happens so what does that look like in our kids? What are some of these symptoms? How does that present? Well, what happens if we don't address inflammation from these are just from some of these minor toxins, like this is happening in our lives and exposures in the day-to-day. Micro exposures from multiple places are what are making the biggest impact within our bodies, not one big ginormous exposure like at Fukushima. It impacts cognitive, so it creates cognitive impairment in many cases. So in the case of heavy metals, when we have this, high levels of heavy metals in the brain impair cognitive functions such as memory, which I was just talking about, attention, and learning. Lead exposure in particular is known to cause significant intellectual deficits and behavioral problems, especially in kids. Where do we have lead? A lot of places. In our piping, in some of the crayons that we use, in the pencils. It is in many places. And you can't test for it. You can actually only test for lead if it is in an acute poisonous time. You could do a blood test. Otherwise, it actually lodges so deeply within the tissue that it is our body's mechanism to protect itself. Chemicals. Exposure to chemicals like organophosphates or, oh my gosh, PBCs can actually reduce IQs, impair learning abilities, and difficult for executive functions, like going to the bathroom. These cognitive impairments can persist long after the initial exposure. What happens to our kids' behavior when they have exposures to this? And the reason that I'm bringing this up for everyone, and I know that you guys are going to get this because you're here watching this video because you feel like you're ready to give up. But there's so much we can do. Behavioral and emotional disorders that come from having large exposures to consistent heavy metals, especially mercury, increased aggression, hyperactivity, and attention deficit disorder. They can disrupt neurotransmitters. They're like the blocking message. They block the messaging that goes across and increase sensory processing disorder. They impact hormones and imbalance our hormones like dopamine, cortisol, serotonin, which is our happiness. And they can lead to mood disorders and increased psychiatric conditions, such as PANS and PANDAS. I shouldn't say they cause it. They exacerbate such conditions. Certain chemicals, like endocrine disruptors that are in creams that we put on our bodies all the time, they can affect the development function of brain's emotional regulation centers as well. So this can look like anxiety, depression, and other mood disorders affecting overall well-being. So to put us back here, my name is Natalie Pelto, and I am one of the co-founders of Blue Life RX. It is a wellness initiative focused on lifestyle medicine for adults and for children. Specifically for me, I specialize in brain development with nutrition and lifestyle interventions for autism and ADHD. And I like to help our children get to these greater gains, better outcomes, and so they can live the life of their dreams and give and offer their gifts to the world. That is what they deserve. And so if you are interested in this channel, make sure to subscribe below. We put out weekly content. I want to share a little bit about when I do history assessments with members. As they come through the program, we assess the Exposome, which is kind of a newer system that has been really studied in the late 2020s. So we know it's not even going to hit your physician's book and medical journals, or not medical journals, but medical books to learn from for another 17 years. So in 2040, the doctors coming out will learn about this. And right now it is being researched by physicians, but because it's such a new system and it takes data and peer-reviewed studies so long to come out, we have to be actively continuing to grow our own knowledge around this type of exposure. So when the exposome is the system that they look at now, named the exposome, based on when children have conditions, or not, I shouldn't say children, when humans have conditions that are a little bit more inexplainable. In the case of autism, this would be a good example, as autism is a spectrum. There is no defining exactly the same case. Each child is unique with their own version of behaviors, some severe and some not. So it is not necessarily a genetic it is a genetic predisposition based on epigenetics, which epigenetics are ruled by environment. And so the exposome is the study of the environment that our children have had as an accumulation throughout their lifetimes. Now, within the program, when I was going through my own journey, I realized that and as I was doing my studies in nutritional therapy, one of the things that really locked in for me based on what I was learning because of my own experience with autism, having a child who went from severe nonverbal, non-communicative, completely at the worst severity there was on all his assessments, to being told we no longer needed our diagnosis and that we were free to go. There were a lot of questions. So there's a lot of research that had been done, but also there were a lot of things that I saw and learned that stated that it can take anywhere up to 3 generations to get ill, to show major changes in the epigenetic factors. And so for myself, as I was studying through nutritional therapy and understanding epigenetics and diving deeper into side research for epigenetics, I realized very quickly that it can take up to 3 generations to get sick, but just 1 generation to get better. And I wanted this awareness for families when they came into the program. And so we do what I like to call an exposome assessment of 3 generations for those who have that knowledge or have those questions of the accumulation of exposures over 3 generations of time to teach and show where this illness or condition could have come from. So I'm going to share my own journey through this because I think it's really valuable for families who are feeling like they want to give up. My grandmother and almost all her children had diabetes and liver issues. Big red flag on my own exposome journey. Although my mom never had diabetes, her diet was very different, yet she still ended up with IBD, which is intestinal bowel disease, and has suffered to this day with such an illness. My own life, not to put too much emphasis on their life, but they were in their I was in their 3rd generation of illness. My own life was riddled with horrible foods that now I know were literally created to make us addicted to them, such as my story of In-N-Out Burger, McDonald's, all of these that now we know have cadmium in many of their recipes. And I was just as picky of an eater as my son back then. McDonald's, Zoodles, bologna, Pop-Tarts, and all of were on regular rotation in my home. And nobody thought anything was wrong with that. Because I was such a picky eater, the fact that I was eating was even that alone so magical. And so no one understood, or back then we never questioned, I shouldn't say understood, but nobody questioned why all of a sudden children were starting to have sensory issues. I had a sensory issue to beans and peas. The texture made me gag, but nobody ever questioned it. I would gag on these, nobody questioned it. Doctors told my mom that if I was gaining weight, I was fine. Nothing was going wrong. Back then, after that, what do foods like this do? What do foods that actually completely disrupt your endocrine system do to a child? And I was this child. Well, they can lead to addictive behavior. They could lead to struggles at home with behavioral challenges. And I was one of these children. And nobody connected the dots to my endocrine system. Forget about the fact that myself had my period for sometimes 30 days at a time. Now, let's talk about moving that through into my son's habits and connecting the dots that he was on the same path I was. My son was born perfectly beautiful in every way, physically anyways, but internally his chemistry was the same as mine. He had 3 or 4 generations of eating horribly. My grandmother, for example, used to bring sometimes dessert for dinner, so I was told, and she had one of the most addictive sweet tooth there was. Processed foods was normal, even back then for my grandmother. And so for my child, it wasn't unusual for him to go to McDonald's 3 times a day because he was being watched by someone else, and that was one of the only foods he ate. At one point, my son, we were told, would potentially never speak. And the 1.5 years where we were going through this autism assessment and diagnosis was the worst of my life. And some of the things that we went through were consistent infections. Consisting in infections, eloping, unable to speak. He was completely nonverbal, non-conversational, and unable to do eye contact. And this life basically was everything I never wanted. And I began to feel really lost, overwhelmed, guilty, and unsure of our future. So when I speak on topics that are hard, like the one that I'm speaking on today, specifically around the feeling of not wanting to keep going, but yet knowing that no one will ever care for your son like you can, and worrying about their future. I know how that felt because I used to feel that way. And the 2 biggest areas that we focused on in my son's life that I got certified because we saw so many positive changes were helping with the nutrition capacity, so filling those nutrition gaps, and of course, learning about toxicity in our world. I have lots of conversations with families and lack of knowledge in the world of information, right? Like we live in the world of information. We can type anything in. And what has happened over the years in the world of information is that it has become so overwhelming. And this is keeping families from not knowing what directions to take action on. And I want to share that, did you know that the food industry, for example, is actually currently ruled by some pretty big giants that are not necessarily have our best interest at heart, specifically in the realm of processed and ultra processed foods. And I'm not going to talk too much about that, but understanding that 90% of our grocery stores have been inverted, like in the last 50 years. In 1970, people were not overweight. People did not have access to ultra processed food. Now that we are in the 2020s, everything is ultra processed food, and our children's diets are upwards to, this is for neurotypical children, 71% of their diets are ultra processed food. For a non-neurotypical child who would fall in the category of autism and ADHD, it's even higher. So overcoming the challenges of building good detoxing habits involves a combination of education, simplification, and motivation. So here are some strategies. This is so important, and you're going to love them. Okay, so number 1, education and awareness. So inform yourself. That is always the first thing. If this is your first touch in hearing about toxicity, if you don't know what a toxin is, I'm going to tell you, but I want you to go research it anyways. A toxin is basically any inorganic or organic substance that harms our tissue, that harms us as a human being. Learn about the sources of toxins. I am a detox specialist, so I have a lot of knowledge on that. I specifically went into that realm and wanted to learn more and more and more. Learn about toxins, how they affect our health, what their pathways are. I have specific videos that are amazing for that. Just continue to watch the videos and you will learn so much. And the benefits of detoxing. Reliable resources and health organizations, scientific studies, and healthcare professionals such as myself can provide credible information. My program for detox specialist was completely research-based. Set clear goals for yourself. So understand to aim to achieve like detoxing or filling nutritional gaps or understanding that world. Make it so that it's the lowest hanging fruit. You'll hear that word in my video so much. Give yourself 5 to 30 minutes a day, maximum. Don't overwhelm yourself that it's not sustainable to learn. And always remember that we really only remember what we learn in 10 minutes. Simplification and gradual changes is where the magic is at, which means you pulling out everything in your home, although very beneficial, is going to be hard for you to maintain if you, depending on which areas that you want to be successful. Example, instead of taking all the makeup out of your house, instead of taking all of the cleaners out of your home, and then all of a sudden trying to replace them completely, number one, it's expensive. Number two, it won't be realistic probably for you to keep up with all of that. Or even if it's you find ways to make it less expensive, having to make your own products can also be a hindrance and a block for families who are busy and living and haven't yet embraced the art of slowing down. One thing I will tell you, autism is there to teach you to slow down. You will hear me say that all the time. So start small. Think about the areas in the different pathways of toxicity that you're being exposed to the most. An easy one is to stop eating out. Don't eat out at places that you know are going to have some of these toxic materials. The next one is use the products that you don't necessarily have a lot of attachment to. For example, something that you use all the time is a cleaner for the floor or a cleaner for your dishes. Maybe that one is the one you don't have a lot of attachment to versus what you put on your face. Although that one is touching your skin for a whole lot longer, you get to make that decision. But pick one and swap it out. If it's consistent and sustainable, then swap out something else. These are the ways to create long, systemic, lasting changes that are easy to maintain. Habit stacking is amazing. Integrate detoxing habits into your existing routine by stacking them with established habits. Here's an example. If you have a morning coffee, make it a habit to drink a glass of water first. Add some lemon and salt if you want. Use cues and rewards. So create cues, reminders. So this can look like alarms. It could look like so much more than that. It could look like alarms. It could look like sticky notes. It could look like little messages on your mirror. It can be so many different things that will be the easiest for you to implement. Okay. For instance, set an alarm to remind you to drink water and reward yourself with a healthy snack or a short break. Get support and accountability. So one of the third tip that I want to give you is to find your people. I am your people. I can tell you right now, I don't know you, but if you're still here watching this video, I am your person. We can hang out. I love to hang out. And if you want to hang out and learn even more about this, you can join the Blue Life Autism program, where we have honestly one of the most amazing communities, and it is lifetime access. So you join and you become part of this community that is so supportive in so many ways. And this is the impact of going further together. Seek professional guidance. Again, this would be somebody like myself. Doesn't have to be me though. Find someone that you trust that is on potentially a similar path or has walked this path similar to you that you want to walk. We generally find our people based on the experience they have in the areas we want success in. Focus on the immediate benefits. So track your progress. You don't have to put it on paper, but do try to keep track of your detox habits that you're proud of and celebrate them. You need to have visible success to keep motivation going. And always be mindful and practice gratitude. Mindset is one of the biggest components of success within our program. Strategy, I'd say, is about 30%. Mindset is 70%. And that's not the way we like to look at it, but that is the way that we do see success. Tip number 5 is to check out your environment and accessibility. Start with your home. Doesn't have to be detoxing the body first. Start with looking at what is in your home. And as you're making this progress, as you're taking intentional action, your will to keep going will go up. As you see your child regulate, your will and your worry about not being there for when they or something happening to you will diminish because you know they're going to be fine. Make healthy choices convenient for your family. Keep healthy food and detoxing aids around. I just use food for detox. We don't use supplements in the program. Water is a great one, and easily accessible. Food, specific foods. Shop the perimeter. You actually end up shopping less when you start to eat healthy and you start to detox with food. Now, those are my 5 tips to help you to regain your mojo, to start to realize that you can win at this. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and follow and subscribe.